Some women never raise their voices. They never compete for attention. They never beg to be understood. And yet, long after they have disappeared from someone's life, their presence remains like an unfinished sentence echoing through an empty room. It is not because they were perfect. It is not because they played impossible games. It is because certain moments awaken something hidden inside another person, something Carl Jung described as the shadow, the unseen part of the psyche that quietly shapes emotion, desire, and fear. Sometimes what wounds the ego is not rejection. Sometimes it is the realization that another person refuses to become a mirror for the version of ourselves we desperately wanted to believe. Imagine an ordinary evening. A crowded cafe hums with conversation, coffee cups clink softly against porcelain, and countless voices dissolve into meaningless noise. Across the room sits a woman who appears completely at peace with herself. She is neither trying to impress nor trying to disappear. Her attention belongs to the present moment instead of the opinions surrounding her. Nearby, a man notices her, but not because she demands attention. Something subtler pulls his awareness toward her. Jung might describe this as projection beginning its quiet work. The unconscious has a habit of painting hidden longings onto strangers. What appears fascinating on the outside often reflects something unfinished within. Many people assume attraction begins with appearance. Psychology suggests something deeper. Human beings are often drawn toward qualities they have neglected in themselves. Confidence attracts those who feel uncertain. Calm unsettles those carrying inner chaos. Emotional freedom fascinates those imprisoned by constant validation. The woman herself may not realize she has become a mirror. Yet mirrors are uncomfortable because they reveal what words cannot. The first behavior is almost invisible. She refuses to chase certainty where none exists. She does not force conversations to continue. She does not demand explanations for every silence. Instead, she allows unanswered moments to remain unanswered. To someone with secure self-worth, this is simply emotional balance. But to someone whose identity depends on reassurance, the silence becomes deafening. The ego wants control. It wants every emotional loose end neatly tied together. When another person declines to participate in that struggle, the mind begins filling empty spaces with questions. Suddenly, the silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. This is where the shadow quietly enters the room. Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious eventually directs behavior from behind the curtain. A person who fears abandonment may interpret distance as rejection. Someone who secretly doubts their worth may become consumed by the need to prove themselves. The silence itself is not creating the discomfort. It merely reveals what was already waiting beneath the surface. Then something unexpected happens. Days pass. No dramatic confrontation arrives. No emotional performance unfolds. She continues building her own life with the same quiet rhythm as before. She laughs with friends. She pursues meaningful work. She protects her peace without announcing it to the world. The absence of reaction becomes more unsettling than any display of anger could ever be. Not because indifference is a weapon, but because genuine self-possession cannot be negotiated with. Ancient Stoic thinkers often wrote that true strength begins where the need for external approval ends. That idea echoes beautifully alongside Jung's vision of individuation. Individuation is the lifelong process of becoming whole instead of living through masks designed to satisfy others. The woman who values her own inner life gradually becomes less dependent on external validation. Ironically, that quiet independence often appears mysterious to those who have not yet found it within themselves. The second behavior emerges from emotional clarity. She no longer mistakes potential for reality. She listens less to promises and more to consistent actions. The unconscious loves beautiful stories. It creates fantasies where every small gesture becomes evidence of a future that may never arrive. Yet emotional maturity gently interrupts that fantasy. Instead of asking who someone could become, she notices who they repeatedly choose to be. This shift sounds simple, but psychologically it transforms everything. Projection begins to fade. Reality quietly takes its place. For someone accustomed to admiration without accountability, this moment can feel strangely unsettling. The carefully maintained image loses its power when another person sees beyond appearances. Jung warned that personas are necessary for society, but dangerous when mistaken for the authentic self. The persona smiles confidently while the shadow hides insecurity beneath polished words. Recognition of that difference can feel deeply uncomfortable. A turning point arrives almost without warning. There is no dramatic ending. No theatrical goodbye. She simply stops carrying emotional burdens that were never hers to begin with. She no longer explains herself endlessly. She no longer argues against misunderstandings that refuse to disappear. Her energy shifts away from convincing others and toward understanding herself. That transformation often surprises people because it lacks spectacle. Growth rarely announces itself. It simply changes the direction of someone's footsteps. Modern trauma psychology reminds us that many emotional reactions are learned forms of protection rather than conscious choices. A person who fears vulnerability may withdraw before intimacy deepens. Another may seek constant reassurance because uncertainty once felt unsafe. Recognizing these patterns does not excuse hurtful behavior, but it does invite compassion alongside accountability. Healing begins when people notice the difference between protecting themselves and imprisoning themselves. The third behavior is perhaps the most misunderstood. She remains kind without abandoning her boundaries. There is warmth in her voice, but firmness in her decisions. She does not confuse empathy with self-sacrifice. This balance challenges expectations because many people unconsciously believe love requires endless accommodation. Yet healthy relationships breathe through mutual respect, not emotional exhaustion. There is an old image Jung often returned to in different forms: the journey into the forest. Every meaningful transformation requires entering unfamiliar territory where certainty disappears. Relationships often become that symbolic forest. Two people meet believing they are discovering each other, only to realize they are also discovering hidden parts of themselves. Every disappointment reveals an expectation. Every conflict exposes an old wound. Every farewell asks whether identity depends upon another person's presence. Another emotional turning point unfolds quietly. The man begins wondering why her absence feels heavier than anticipated. He searches for explanations outside himself. Perhaps the timing was wrong. Perhaps circumstances interfered. Yet beneath those convenient answers lies another possibility. Maybe her quiet confidence illuminated something unfinished within his own psyche. Maybe the discomfort was never created by her leaving. Maybe it was created by confronting a version of himself that had remained hidden for years. This realization is not about defeat. It is about awakening. Jung believed that what is brought into consciousness no longer controls life from the shadows. The moment someone stops blaming others for every emotional reaction, genuine freedom begins. The same is true for the woman. Her greatest strength is not becoming unforgettable. It is refusing to lose herself while trying to be remembered. In the end, the most powerful presence is rarely the loudest one. It belongs to the person who has learned to sit peacefully with solitude, to recognize projection without becoming trapped inside it, and to choose authenticity over performance. Such a person no longer measures worth through another's attention because identity has deeper roots than admiration alone. Perhaps that is why certain people remain unforgettable. Not because they mastered manipulation. Not because they shattered anyone's ego on purpose. But because their quiet integrity invited others to face parts of themselves they had avoided for far too long. And when that journey finally begins, it becomes clear that the greatest relationship is never the one built upon fear of losing someone. It is the one built upon the courage to become whole. The woman who walks away in silence isn't weak, she simply sees more. And the person who chooses growth over pride discovers that no wounded ego is stronger than a soul willing to face its own shadow.